was a nice summer day. My 5-year-old son James was playing outside in the backyard of our suburban home. James has always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends, but he has always had a wild imagination. I was in the living room watching TV when I heard what sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. I'm not sure who it could have been he was talking to. Could he have finally made a friend? Being a single dad, it's hard for me to always keep an eye on my son. So I decided to go outside and check on him. When I went into the backyard, I was a bit confused because James was the only person there. Was he talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard another voice. "James, it's time to come inside," I called out to him. He came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. It was about lunchtime, so I decided to make him a sandwich. "James, who are you talking to out there?" I asked. James looked up at me for a moment.
"I was playing with my new friend,"
he said, smiling. I poured him some milk and continued to pry as any good father would. "Does your friend have a name? Why didn't you ask him to have lunch with us?" I asked. James stared at me for a moment before replying.
"His name is Laughing Jack."
I was a bit taken aback by what he had said. "Oh, that's a strange name. What does your friend look like?" I asked, a bit confused.
"He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks, and he always smiles."
I soon realized that my son was talking about an imaginary friend. I supposed it was normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real friends to play with. I assumed it was just a phase. The rest of the day went by as usual, and it was starting to get late, so I put James to bed. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and made sure to turn on his nightlight before I closed the door. I was pretty tired myself, so I decided to go to bed not long after. I had an awful nightmare. It was dark. I was in some kind of run-down amusement park. I was nervous and scared for some reason, running through an endless field of empty tents, broken down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had an awful look to it. Everything was completely drained of color, completely black and white. The prized stuffed animals all hung from nooses in the game huts, all with sick grins attached on their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at me, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Everywhere I ran, I was horrified of seeing something pop out from the corner. Then suddenly, I began to hear music playing. It was the sounds of Pop Goes the Weasel echoing through the park. It was almost hypnotizing. I followed its tune to the circus tent, almost in a trance, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single spotlight shining on the center of the big top. As I walked toward the light, the music slowed down gradually. I found myself singing along, unable to stop. All berry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought 'twas all in good fun. But the music stopped right before its climax. And suddenly, the lights shot on. The intensity of the lights was blinding. All I could see was a small, dark silhouette shuffling towards me. And another, and another, and then another. I lost count. They were all coming towards me. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen. All I could do was watch as the haunting figures drew nearer. As they got closer, I could see they were children. As I looked at each one of them, I noticed they were all horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body. Others were severely burned, and others were missing limbs, even eyes and teeth. The children surrounded me, and they began clawing at my flesh, pulling me to the ground and tearing into my body. As the children tore me apart and I faded away, all I could hear was laughter. Horrible, awful, horrific laughter. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. After taking a few deep breaths, I looked over and saw that a few of James' action figures were positioned facing me on the top of my nightstand. I sighed. James had probably woken up early and put these here. I gathered up the toys and made my way to James' room. Feeling almost traumatized from the nightmare that I had. It was so unbelievably horrific. However, when I opened the door, James was fast asleep. I just shrugged and placed the toys back into his toy box and headed out to the living room. A little while later, James woke up and I made him breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a bit groggy. He probably didn't sleep well either. I decided to ask him about the toys. Hey, James, did you put the toys in Daddy's room this morning? His eyes shot up at me for a moment, then quickly glanced back down at his cereal.
No, Laughing Jack did it.
I rolled my eyes and responded, Well, you tell Laughing Jack to keep the toys in your room, okay? James nodded and finished his breakfast. Then he ran outside to go play in the backyard. I went to relax in the living room, and I must have dozed off, because I woke up a couple hours later. When I looked at the clock and noticed how much time had passed, I was panicking. I was worried. It had been over 2 hours and I hadn't checked on him. I went and stepped out into the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. So I called out to him, James? James, where are you? Just then, I heard a giggle come from the front yard. I rushed through the gate, around to the front of the house. James was sitting on the sidewalk, right there. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked over to him. James, how many times have I told you to stay in the backyard? James? What are you eating? James looked up at me. then reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of hard candies in various colors. My mind began to race. James, who gave you that candy? James just stared at me, not speaking and pouting. James, please tell Daddy where you got that candy. James hung his head down and said,
Laughing Jack gave it to me.
I kneeled down to look at him in the eye. James, I have had enough of this damn Laughing Jack shit. He is not real. This is a very serious situation, and I need you to tell me who gave you that candy. I could see my son's eyes tear up. But Papa, Laughing Jack did give me the candy. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James has never lied to me before, but what he's telling me isn't possible. I forced him to spit out the candy and I threw the rest away into the garbage. James appeared to be fine. Maybe I was just overreacting. After all, he could have gotten it from the old lady down the street. Either way, I'm gonna have to keep a closer eye on James. That night, I helped James get ready for bed. I was helping him put on his pajamas, and I looked at him and noticed he was still pouting. I looked at him and said, James, are you ready to tell me who actually gave you that candy now? He hung his head and just continued to pout. A little frustrated and kind of sad that he was mad with me, I tucked him into bed and said goodnight. When I closed the door, I looked behind me and whispered, I love you. I stayed up for a few hours, watching TV, thinking about what had happened earlier today. I was genuinely worried about James, thinking that maybe it was my way of parenting that was causing him to act like this. A wave of guilt washed over me. After a while, I felt myself drifting off. I laid my head in my pillow and fell asleep. But I woke up again. I looked at my phone and it was 2 a.m. I just could not seem to get any sleep recently for some reason. I got out of bed and walked downstairs, feeling thirsty. As I poured myself a glass of water from the sink, I began drinking it. That was when I heard a faint noise coming from James's room. I didn't know what it was at first, but it started to sound like a soft moan. Was James asleep? And then I heard something. A giggle. A giggle that did not belong to my son. As soon as my mind comprehended what I heard, I dropped the glass onto the floor as it shattered into pieces, and I then grabbed the biggest kitchen knife from the drawer that I could. I rushed over to James's room and opened the door. I tried to turn on the light switch, but it wouldn't come on. I took a step in, and I could feel a warm liquid on my feet. Suddenly, James's nightlight turned on when I got close enough to it. And I could see the absolute horror laid out in front of me. James's body was nailed to the wall. The nails pierced through his hands and feet. His chest was cut wide open, and his organs hung down to the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed, as were most of his teeth. I couldn't even comprehend what I was looking at first. But then it sunk in. I was looking at my baby boy. Then I heard the noise that I heard in the kitchen. A soft, desperate moan. James was still alive. My baby, my poor baby. It's so much pain barely clinging to life. I ran across the room and vomited on the floor. I was crying and screaming at the top of my lungs in horror and disgust. But my sickness was interrupted by a horrible giggle coming from behind me. I spun around in a nervous wreck, wiping the throw up from my mouth. Then, when I looked in front of me, I saw the fiend responsible for all of this horror. It was my son's imaginary friend. His ghost white skin and matted black hair hung down to his shoulders. He had piercing white pupils surrounded by dark black irises. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp, jagged teeth, and his skin didn't look like skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He was wearing a patchy black and white clown outfit with striped sleeves and socks. His body itself was grotesque. His long arms hanging down past his waist, and the way he was poised almost made him look boneless, like a rag doll. He let out a sickening laugh, as if to let me know he was pleased with my reaction to his work. He then turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh even more at the horrific sight that he had laid out. That was enough to shake me from my terror. I snapped and I rushed at him, raising the knife above my head and stabbing him. But as soon as the knife touched him, he vanished. One moment he was there and the other, he wasn't. Just in an instant. The knife passed right through him and it stabbed James' still beating heart as his blood splashed onto my face. No. What have I done? My baby, I killed my baby. I immediately fell on my knees, and I could hear sirens in the distance growing louder. My boy, my my sweet baby boy. I promised I would protect you, but I failed. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. Police soon arrived to find me in front of my son, still holding the knife covered in his blood. The trial was short. Insanity. I was placed in a house for the criminally insane, where I've been for the past 2 months. It's not so bad here. The only reason I'm still awake right now is because I can hear the song Pop Goes the Weasel playing outside of my window. I'll talk to the orderlies about it in the morning.